Welcome in to another episode of the Field of 68's bracketology show. That's right, the aptly named Fielding the 68. I am your host this Monday episode, Jim Root, joined by Lukas Harkins from Heat Check CBB and Andy Bottoms of Inside the Hall and the Assembly Call podcast, two of the best bracketologists on the internet. I'm going to break down all the goings on from this weekend, take a look at the bracket from the top all the way down to the bottom in the bubble, get you caught up on everything we saw over the weekend. And that's kind of where I want to start, fellas, on Best Bets, the show I host here on Field of 68. We often talk about takeaways from the night before. So I want to ask both of you, which team got the most important win over the weekend, whether it's somebody like St. Mary's at the top of the bracket that validates their profile, or if it's a bubble team that gets them a lot closer to the field, maybe all the way into the field. Lukas, I'll go to you first here. Which team made the biggest step over the weekend?
Yeah, I think I'm looking more as a matchup that did things both for a team and against another, and that's Northwestern's win at Wisconsin yesterday. I think Northwestern is kind of one of those teams that was flirting around the cut line, but I was on the right side, and same with Wisconsin coming into that matchup. And Northwestern now completes the season sweep of another team that's hanging around the bubble in Wisconsin. They beat them both in Evanston and in Madison. Because they're two really massive wins that will carry a lot of weight comparing themselves to the rest of the bubble when we get towards the end of March.
That makes sense. Yeah, that just kind of a needle mover for both. Definitely the wrong direction for the Badgers there as they slide out of the top 75. So not a Q1 game for Northwestern anymore, right, with the Badgers continuing to slide. Andy, to you, what was your biggest team victory for this weekend?
Well, on a personal level, it would be the IU win over Purdue. But I don't know that does a ton for bracketology because it really didn't push Purdue down very far. It gives IU a nice little bump, another good win. But I would not say that one, even though that was the one that I enjoyed the most. The one for me that kind of stands out as we think about talking about one seeds is Texas winning at Kansas State. I think it really propels Texas. I think today, if you put them as a one seed, I did not, but I think there's a reasonable argument to be made there. And certainly with them facing Kansas tonight, I think they give themselves a real chance to vault themselves into that conversation. So, big road win within the league was huge for them. I do think the Gonzaga St. Mary's that you mentioned was probably the other one that I would have talked about as well. I think that, as you put it, gives St. Mary's a chance to kind of validate their computer numbers. And I think probably for those who are a bit more down on Gonzaga than they have been in recent years and trying to figure out where to slot them, I think it reinforces those beliefs as well. So those would have been the two that stood out for me.
If I would add another one, I'd even add Oklahoma State winning at home over TCU, just partially because of how the game played. I mean, Oklahoma State really controlled a lot of that game until TCU made a big run there in the second half. And I think Oklahoma State really needed to get that game, and they were able to get that one.
Andy, you just alluded to the one seeds. We're definitely going to talk about that Kansas-Texas matchup tonight quick and whether that's a one seed play-in. But we're going to talk about one seeds that are right now, before that game has even taken place. We'll go to Lukas first here. Who are your one seeds as it stands today? We'll see if Purdue even slid out of the top overall spot. What do you got for us?
They didn't for me. Purdue remains my number one overall team, followed by Alabama in the 2 spot. Those remain the same. Houston jumps up to the number 3 overall from number 4. And unlike Andy, I actually did lump Texas into that 4th spot for the number 1 seed. I think, which you kind of already referenced a little bit earlier, Jim, I do feel that whoever wins tonight between that Texas-Kansas matchup will be my 4th 1 seed tomorrow. They're very close. And Arizona is right in that mix too. I think you can make a very strong argument for Arizona to be the 4th 1 seed today. And I think it's going to be harder to make that argument after tonight against the winner of Texas-Kansas.
Yeah, that extra Q1 win that one of them picks up, especially for Texas, the Q1A on the road. That's big time. So Andy, I guess we know you don't have the same 4. Let's find out which 4 you had.
Yeah, so 3 of the 4 were the same. It did have Purdue and Alabama still as the top 2 in that order. I think when you look at what Purdue's done, again, I got to gloat about the IU win briefly before. Now I have to say nice things about Purdue. But really, when you look at the resume, they've got 9 quad 1 wins and 9 wins against the field, even if you don't count the sweep of Penn State, who's in the bubble picture as well. And they're 11-1 in road neutral games now. So pretty hard to to stack somebody up above them. I did have Houston as well, but I had Arizona in there. They're an odd one because the losses are strange, as I've said on here, multiple times. Losing at Utah, a team that's fallen off a little bit, losing at home, Q3 home loss to Washington State is odd, but they are 5-0 in high quad one games, so that definitely helps. But I think there is an argument to be made for really about 4 teams once you get past I think the top 2 are pretty clear cut, and then I think you've got all the teams that we've talked about, including Texas and Kansas, in that next mix. But for me, I gave Arizona the nod, and Houston. At a certain point, the Temple loss is not a good one, but you got to give them credit for the things that they have done. They're 10-0 in road neutral games. They rank first in the quality metrics. Just because they don't play in a bigger conference, it becomes hard to penalize them for not being able to win big games. They did beat St. Mary's, and the fact that St. Mary's played so well against Gonzaga and got that win helps Houston a bit by proxy. They won at Virginia. And so, I think they're going to be right in that mix. But I think you could take any one of those other 4 or put them on the one line, and I wouldn't really have a huge argument with it.
Is there any bonus that Arizona and Houston get that they both took a Q3 loss, but then went and beat that team again on the road? Like Houston went and beat Temple on the road, kind of took care of business. Arizona beat Washington State on the road. Andy, does that cancel the Q3 a little bit or no?
I don't think it totally does. Certainly for about half of the Houston game yesterday, it certainly did not. As they went through. So, you look at the final margin and maybe you feel some vindication that, hey, we really are the better team. We showed it here, lost a close game at home in their case. I think it helps, certainly more so than losing that other game or not playing well in that other game for the duration. But I don't think it totally takes it away either.
All right, so Lucas, you did say you think tonight it can be a play-in for a 1 seed. So that does confirm you have Kansas close enough, right, that they're in range of add one more high-end Q1 win against a team of 1 or 2 seed caliber. You'd have them sliding up there?
Yep, I would. That'd give them 14 quad 1 and 2 wins, which would lead the country. They'd have 10 quad 1 wins, which would also lead the country. I think it'd be really hard to keep them off the top line if they take care of business against Texas tonight.
All right, and then before we go to the bubble, I want to get our consensus 1 seeds. If we have them, producer Dagan, please yell at me. If we do not have those ready to launch, okay, perfect. We do. Purdue, Alabama, Houston, and Arizona. That's the 4 seed across 1 through 4, the 4 1 seeds. So no Texas or Kansas, but I think that might change on Friday, given whatever happens tonight on Monday. So stay tuned. Lots to change still at the top of the bracket. All right, now let's head down towards the bottom of the at-large pool, the bubble talk. We're going to talk last 4 in. I think we'll go here to Andy first after we talked Lucas's 1 seeds. Where do you stand on the last 4 in today after a big weekend of hoops?
Yeah, I've got a few of the same teams, at least 2 of them in there that I had on Friday, in Kentucky and Nevada, still right in that mix. Kentucky did get the win over Florida. A nice win, but not really enough to move the needle. And while there were parts of the bracket where it seemed like everybody lost, a lot of the teams that were right around the cut line did win over the course of the weekend. If you think about Northwestern, as Lucas mentioned earlier, West Virginia gets a win. So Kentucky did the same as well. For them, really just have the 1 win at Tennessee, a great win, but otherwise they've beaten Texas A&M and Florida, and that's really what they have going for them in terms of quality wins. The quality metrics are good though, but just 1 and 6 in quad 1. Nevada, talked about them on Friday, have beaten all the best Mountain West teams at home. Would be well served to try to find a way to win, a game or 2 against that group on the road. That starts with their next game at New Mexico, and then they play at Utah State a couple games after that. So, and then finish with 4 winnable games there. So they're right in that mix. Memphis is a team who was in that area who did not win over the weekend, lost to Tulane, ended up getting swept by them over the course of the season. And when you step back and take another look at their resume, they beat Auburn on a neutral floor, but otherwise that arguably is their only win against the field at this point. Again, beat Texas A&M at home, similar to what you mentioned above, but won at Cincinnati, who's playing better, beat Nebraska on a neutral floor, but again, nothing really to hang their hat on in terms of quality wins. So pushes them into that mix for me. And then Oklahoma State, that Lukas mentioned earlier, got a nice win over TCU, have done most of their damage at home, short of winning at Oklahoma to get the sweep with the Sooners. But moving in the right direction there. 4 quad 1 wins is helpful, and lots of other chances to get those to play themselves further in or play themselves completely out. Their next handful of games is they get Texas Tech at home, which I guess is the only real breather you can even claim in the Big 12. But then they go to Iowa State, play Kansas at home, and go to TCU in West Virginia. So we'll learn a lot about them in these next few games, and if they play well in those, can really solidify their spot. If they don't, we'll probably be talking about them in a first four out conversation instead.
Yeah, big missed opportunity for Memphis there. It seemed like they had that game sealed up, and then were not able to finish against the Green Wave.
Feels like their MO this year. I think they have a handful of games where they'd be much safer than they are right now had they been able to close out. You could take your pick of a couple different games on the schedule, and that was certainly no exception.
And it might just come down for Memphis once again. Can you beat Houston? That seems like an annual tradition of, all right, they've got these 2 shots at Houston still, and we'll see if they get one.
And
all
those
right, Lukas,
become huge games for Houston too, as you look forward to them. I mean, they don't really have a lot of other chances either to. They're just trying not to stub their toe. So those games become huge for both teams. And I think they played twice over the last 5 or so games of the season.
Yep. All right, Lukas, to you. What about your last 4 in right now?
Yeah, I think we're getting a little bit closer in terms of overall bracketologists with around the same 68 teams getting in the field. All 4 of Andy's last 4 in are in my field as well, although I'm a little bit higher on Oklahoma State and Kentucky. So my last 4 in, I'm with Andy on Nevada and Memphis. Those are my first 2. And then I got New Mexico and Clemson filling out those spots. New Mexico, the road loss to Utah State, isn't a real herder on last week, Wednesday, but they have really poor quality metrics overall. They're getting really held down by being 73rd. In DPI, they average 61 across the quality metrics. They got 2 of those quad 3 losses. They're just kind of in a difficult spot in terms of where you want to seed them. I think their selection numbers are really good. They're sitting in the top 30 in resume metrics, but the quality metrics lag behind in a way where I think they're in better shape for selection than they are for seeding right now. As far as Clemson goes, back-to-back losses at Boston College, and then what would have been a nice opportunity at home against Miami. They have 3 quad 3 and 4 losses. What really stands out for Clemson is their 7-3 record against quads 1 and 2, but none of those wins are in quad 1A. And once you see Clemson's non-conference strength of schedule sitting at 339th in the country, it's pretty easy to make an argument against them as being one of those teams that's safely in the field, because they weren't really challenged out of conference like a lot of other teams in the area were.
Clemson's tricky right now, right? Because they're like right atop the conference, so they could get the auto bid. But I think it's more interesting to look at them right now in this discussion because, like, look, if we ran the ACC tournament today, they're not the favorite to win.
That's how I do my bracket too. I go by if it's a team that's of at-large quality, I leave the auto bid to whoever is the highest rated seed in my brackets. I think that gives a picture of where a team right on the cut line really is.
Okay. Andy, I assume, did you give Clemson the auto bid this week right now?
Yeah, I did. I think they're still up 1 game in the win column because they've played one more game than I think Virginia, who's right by them. So yeah, I had them there, but I did have them as 11. They're right in that mix for me. I think they were kind of jumbled in the middle of the last 4 in that I had. So I'm right with Lukas in terms of what they have accomplished, and there's some good stuff on their resume, but there is some ugly stuff as well. The Q3 loss, 2 Q4 losses, bad non-conference strength of schedule. And if you look at their wins, beating Duke at home is great. Winning at Pitt continues to look pretty good. Beat NC State, swept Virginia Tech, but really outside of the Duke win, depending upon what your view is of Duke, like there's nothing amazing that stands out there as you look across that. And it just is a team that really can't afford to take on any more bad losses, and their schedule to a certain extent has as many opportunities for that as anything. They still play Louisville, they play Syracuse at home, which wouldn't necessarily be a good loss, and they play Notre Dame, and then the other games are all losable as they hit the road to go to Carolina, to go to NC State, and to go to Virginia. So they're in a tricky
none of their
spot.
remaining home games help them at all.
No, absolutely not. So they have their toughest games remaining are all on the road, and none of the other games outside of those 3 really do anything but hurt you. So other than that, things look really positive for them going.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, fantastic. No, but I think that syncs up with what Lukas is saying, is where if they're in the at-large pool, it's not safe. It is a precarious status for Clemson right now. And that's probably where they'll be unless they have that big time run through the ACC tournament, which we may or may not anticipate. All right, now let's take a quick look at the consensus last four in here. This also includes, of course, Rocco Miller and Brad Wachtell, the two other bracketologists here on Fielding 68. Kentucky, Memphis, North Carolina in there in the last four in now. This preseason number one, not receiving votes in the AP poll anymore. The last four in, what a fall they have taken. And then Oklahoma State, the last team in our consensus field. Now let's flip the script to the other side here. Teams 69 through 72, as I like to call them, even though they're really like 49 through 52. That would be more apt. But all right, Lukas, back to you for your first four out. We'll see if there's any of those teams that we just saw in our consensus last four in.
No, I think I match up with the consensus 68 pretty evenly across the board. My first four out, I have Texas A&M sneaking in there. They played really well in conference play, but they still have those two quad 3-4 losses hanging on. They only have 4 wins across the upper two quadrants, which holds them back a bit. Seton Hall has climbed pretty solidly into the mix of the bubble. They have 2 quad 1A wins. They're 5-8 overall in quads 1 and 2, which is okay. 1 bad loss. All their metrics stand between 43 and 60, which puts them kind of firmly in that conversation. They're right in the same vein as Mississippi State. Pretty similar resumes overall in that capacity. I'm still holding on to Wisconsin as my fourth team out, simply because their resume is still pretty solid. They're top 50 in both of the two resume metrics. They have 7 wins across quad 1 and 2, which is an impressive number. 2 of those victories are in quad 1A. What really holds them back, obviously, is sub 60 in all 3 quality metrics, 77th in the net. They have an upwards battle coming, but I think they put themselves in terms of their number of quad 1 and 2 wins to remain in that mix along the cut line.
We're going to do a little more. The chat's talking about it now. After we get Andy's last four in, or first four out, excuse me, we're going to talk a little more UNC. Don't worry. We've got to get the heels discussion, given how close they now are to the cut line. But all right, Andy, what about you? Your first four out.
Yeah, a good amount of overlap here. Maybe the order is slightly different, but I had Seton Hall, A&M, and Wisconsin within my group as well, and then Mississippi State would have been my 5th team out. So pretty in sync there. As Lukas said, Seton Hall solid at this point. Didn't really, their game against DePaul over the weekend wasn't really gonna help, but took care of business there. But now they get Creighton at home coming up next. That would give them another win to pair with or go with the UConn win and their win at Rutgers. For them, A&M, the bad losses don't help. The non-conference strength of schedule is around 250, losing record in road and neutral games. So, work to do there. They've won at Auburn and at Florida, have swept Florida, which is helpful. But they got Auburn again at home this week, and then they go to LSU in the game you really can't drop, and then Arkansas at home. So some chances at home to pick up a couple more solid wins for them. Wisconsin, I think we've talked about quite a bit. They've got work to do. Just the metrics are starting to look pretty ugly. The quality metrics are bad. The net's outside the top 75. But they do have enough quality wins if they can string together some wins here and kind of get back on track. There's good things to be had there. They go to Penn State and to Nebraska this week. If they win both those, that puts them at 8-5 road neutral, which would certainly help as you go through there. And then Utah State's the team that I had that Lukas did not.
Talk me into it, please. I've been waiting for someone to talk me into Utah State. I can't get into it myself.
I'm not sure that I can. But at a certain point, you look at the record. The resume metrics are really good. Yeah. So if you think about first selection, like that part helps. Yep. But then you dig in a little bit deeper. They're 0-3 in quad 1, but 6-0 in quad 2, 9-0 in quad 3. So they've 15-3 in those top 3 quadrants. But then you've got 2 quad 4 losses to go with it.
It's such a weird resume to
it's kind of odd. They're 8-4 in road neutral games, which the committee would like. But the challenge is they are going to struggle to find a road win to really move the needle at this point. They already lost at Boise State, at San Diego State, at Nevada. And so they beat New Mexico at home. They beat Oral Roberts, which helps. But yeah, it's kind of tough to talk yourself into it. It almost, I feel like I look at them and it's like, no matter what they do, I feel like they'd be right around the, 4th team out or something else. I just don't know.
I really want to believe. I really do. Yeah. They're a fun team to watch. I really want to believe that they're in the mix. I have a hard time with, as you mentioned, no quad 1 wins, 2 quad 4 losses.
Yeah. So they got San Diego State coming up as their next game. 3 of their next 4 at home. So that doesn't help the road situation in terms of getting a more marquee road win, but still at 8-4 on the road already. They go to San Jose State. If they win that, then 9-4 road neutral. So I think there's a lot of good things to like. There's just not like that one thing that is great to hang your hat on with them.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we were saying about Clemson. There's enough good stuff to outweigh those really bad losses. There's just not that high level thing for Utah State that offsets it and kind of balances the scales for them. That is a tough thing to have on the cut line. All right, let's go to the consensus first 4 out, and we've just talked about them all: Wisconsin, Texas A&M, Seton Hall, Utah State. So our bracketologists are pretty aligned at this stage. There's definitely more to come, though, over the last month of the season here. Teams will play their way in, they'll play their way out. And that brings me to my next question that I posed to you both before we got on the show, because I wanted to make sure you had adequate time to at least give it some thought. But is there a team or two that's not in that picture yet, that we haven't even discussed much on this show, that you think could play all their way back into the bracket? I know Seton Hall wasn't really on the radar a couple of weeks ago. And they've sort of played their way closer. So other teams over this next month that we think have opportunities to get back into this field. Lukas, I'll go to you first. Is there a team you came up with that's not quite there yet that you think could get there?
If you asked me about this question a week ago, I would have said Seton Hall. I felt like I was a little bit ahead of the curve on feeling where they could end up. I think a couple teams stand out still. Penn State, I've really enjoyed watching all year. Their offense is electric. Obviously coming off a rough road loss at Nebraska. But the Big Ten just gives you so many opportunities this year where I think they're still in a position to make a run. It kind of just comes down to if they're able to find their shooting stroke on the road. They've really been a really hot shooting team at home this year, and they've struggled in road matchups to shoot the ball. They're going to have those opportunities. They go at Maryland, at Minnesota, at Ohio State, at Northwestern. And I think one of those matchups I think is really friendly to the rest of the Big Ten right now, which is at Ohio State. Ohio State really hasn't played well recently, but its metrics are still in pretty good shape to help out the league. I think there are opportunities for Penn State to make a push. And I think Florida's probably in that range too. Florida's missing wins more than anything else, and they have 5 of their remaining games against KenPom sub 100 opponents. If they take advantage of all those, they're very quickly up to 18 total wins for the year. With a home win over Tennessee is kind of the sparkling point on the resume. I think they're a team that can still be dangerous out of the SEC.
That sounds like a Kentucky resume. Oh, we got enough wins and we beat Tennessee. How's that sound? Is that enough for us? We'll see. They've like you said,
is that BBN out here knocking on Jim's door?
They are. They're coming for me. They're sending me to BBN jail. It's going to be tough. But Andy, what about you? Is there a team or two, whether Lukas mentioned them or not, that you're highest on?
I forgot to.
No. Let's save that one for Andy. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I had a couple that you did not mention. Oregon was one of them. Big, but we're going to know whether that's a legitimate possibility after this weekend when they host USC and UCLA. If they really probably need to sweep both of those, I would say. You look at their resume, their Q3 losses were both at home, came to Utah Valley and UC Irvine, both teams who are toward the top of their leagues in the top 100 of the net, I believe, or right around there. So not great, not teams you want to lose to at home, but not egregiously bad in the way that some of the other teams are there. Have a good non-conference strength of schedule. Quality metrics are getting a little bit better as you go forward, and they've beaten Arizona, and so that's helpful there. They really just have to take care of business in these 2 home games over the weekend, and then not stub their toe on the road. But I think they could start to pile up wins, as Lukas mentioned about Florida, if they can do that. The other team I flagged is Virginia Tech. The challenge is obviously they have not won a road game. That is bad. There's no getting around it. But they do have a chance.
That's why they're not in my first 4 out. Yeah. I was real close.
Yeah, they do have a chance to get a few down the stretch. They've got a lot of winnable games left. So the 3 winnable road games they have are at Notre Dame, at Georgia Tech, at Louisville. They also host Boston College at home. The big stretch that's going to define whether they can get in or not is they go 3 straight games, Pitt and Miami at home, and then they go to Duke. So for them, they've got the Hunter Couture injury that's a factor. He got injured in the Boston College loss, which is their Q3 loss and their worst loss on their resume. So it's always hard. We talk about this all the time with injuries. You can't assume that if he's there, they don't drop all the games in a row that they did. But if they can prove they can play well with him back and at full strength, then I think that helps. And for them, head-to-head isn't everything, but they've beaten Oklahoma State on a neutral floor. They beat Penn State on a neutral floor. They beat North Carolina at home and don't go to UNC. So those things won't totally flip the scales, but are helpful for the purposes of that. But none of that matters if they can't find a way to win some road games. They did win 3 neutral court games, so that helps a little bit, where they've, at least the aggregate number there is they're 3-7, which doesn't look nearly as bad as 0-7, but they got to win some true road games, and they've got a chance to do that, and have been playing well of late. So those were the 2 that I had earmarked that were not really that close to my first 4. I guess they're close enough to my first 4 out, but still a few teams separating them from that, those 4 teams.
I'm glad you brought up Virginia Tech. That was the team I wanted to talk about, just because with Couture in, they're 14-5, 5-4 against the top 2 quadrants, and that the loss to BC has the asterisk if that's when he left. That's when he got hurt. So they are tricky. It's a tough team to figure out. And as that sample with Couture grows down the stretch here, I think they'll be able to make a pretty strong statement for themselves if they win. It's pretty simple for these bubble teams. You keep winning and you'll get in. So we'll see how it goes down the stretch. All right, I promised UNC discussion and we did not deliver yet. So I want to go back to them. Lukas, what is it about UNC? I guess you have them above your last 4 in, but that is not where they are in our consensus bracket. What is UNC most worried about on their profile right now? What can they fix down the stretch?
Well, being 1-7 in quad 1, I think is really the standout thing. I mean, if you look at teams around the cut line, there's a lot that have 3 or more wins in that department, and that's really the huge asterisk on the resume, is not having those wins. But there's opportunities left. Their schedule gets Virginia at home, Duke at home, NC State on the road, Wake Forest on the road. All those games qualify as quad 1 right now. And a Miami game at home might get there. Miami can creep into the top 30 of the net. They're 39th right now. That could potentially creep into quad 1 too. So they need those games. But really right now, it's just they have a complete lack of quality. They're 0-5 in quad 1A. Their metrics are quite solid across the board, top 45 in all 6 resume metrics. All 6 team sheet metrics, but it's the lack of quality wins that's really blowing up their current status.
Andy, these committee members are humans too. Is there anything that you think might creep into them? Like, all right, we know this team did this last year. They were a big discussion point on this show most of February of whether or not they were good enough to get in. Then they go on that run and they make the NCAA title game. Do the human members of the committee have that in the back of their mind when they're thinking about the Tar Heels?
It shouldn't really factor into the decision making, but I also, as you said, it's pretty hard to ignore completely. And I think if you see some of the same underlying themes from a year ago, again, I don't know that you can override the rest of the process to say, hey, we got to find a way to get this team in. But given the guys that they have back that were also on that team, and some of the same issues that you saw a year ago, maybe there's an argument to be made there. But yeah, Lukas is right. I mean, the challenge is they just haven't beaten enough quality opponents. I mean, NC State is the only win they have right now over a team that is in the field or safely in the field. They did beat Charleston, so depending upon your view of them, whether you're giving them the auto bid or not, they're kind of in the mix of teams that would be right around the bubble. But that was a game that came at home. Depending upon what you think of Charleston, that may or may not be an impressive win to you. And so that really is what it comes down to, is trying to find ways to win some of those games. They've been close, just haven't been able to get it done, and don't have a quad 3 or quad 4 loss. But at some point, you got to start to stack a few of those. But as Lukas mentioned, their schedule gives lots of opportunities for that, and there's a chance to really move quickly up the seed line or the seed list as the actual on-court results back up the metrics, and then you can kind of use those to say, hey, this is really a team that isn't a 10 or 11 seed. They're much better than that. So that starts with going to Wake Forest this week, and that really these next 4 games are all pretty important for them, and get a little bit of a reprieve against Notre Dame, and then have Virginia and Duke in 2 out of their last 3. So lots of good opportunities, but if they don't take advantage of those, they're going to be sweating it out in a way that they kind of were last year heading into the ACC tournament.
It's just wild because, preseason number 1, and there was pushback on that preseason number 1. People are like, oh, I don't think they're quite that good, but not a single soul is making the case that they might not make the tournament this year. And yet here we are, just a wild turn of events for that squad. All right, let's go to a couple team specific discussion points before we hit a few chat questions. Don't worry, chat. We will hit those questions. Dagan is rounding them up, I'm sure, behind the scenes. I wanted to ask you guys about teams I'm calling can't win the big one. And this is pretty close to a Carolina related discussion too. But Maryland and West Virginia, two teams that are 0-for against the top of the top, Q1A. Maryland's 0-5 versus Q1A, but 16-2 versus everybody else. That's pretty good. But we talked about Virginia Tech not having a road win. Maryland does have two, but they are not good road wins, not needle moving road wins at all. So Lucas, where do we stand on a team like Maryland or West Virginia, who's also 0-8 versus Q1A, 14-1 versus everybody else? Great metrics. How do you kind of parse out these teams that don't have that top of the line victory to hang their hat on?
Yeah, I'm a little bit higher on Maryland than I think others might be. I have Maryland sitting on the back end of my 7 line right now. Their metrics have creeped into the top 25 in quality, 22 in BPI, 23 in KenPom, 20th in Sagarin. They're up to almost 500 across the top 2 quadrants. And I think when it comes to being 0-for against the top line, I'm less concerned about that because they have 7 overall losses. 5 of them are against that top line. They've proven that they beat pretty much everybody they're supposed to beat. And they lose the games against really, really tough opponents, which is the case for most teams. I think I'm a little bit more lenient towards teams that have clearly beaten the teams they're supposed to and have struggled against high quality, and the teams that get lucky once and lose against teams that they really should have beaten. And I think that Maryland has proven that they're good against that quality of team. And also, conversely to West Virginia, they're above 500 against the top 3 quadrants. Maryland's 9-7 across the upper 3. West Virginia is only 8-9.
Fair enough. Andy, any additional thoughts on that one? Either of those teams, really?
Yeah, I mean, Maryland, what they lacked, as you said, is a signature road win. They did beat they did not beat Tennessee. They beat Miami on a neutral floor. So that's a good win that shows they can win away from home, but it's not the same as a true road win. And if you look at the 4 road games they have left, one's at Michigan State. That's going to be a tough game. Obviously at Nebraska doesn't probably move the needle a great deal. And then at Ohio State, at Penn State. So none of those, Michigan State's kind of in the middle of the pack. Ohio State is floundering, and you've got Penn State who's fighting for a bubble spot. A couple of those could help, and maybe it's just a volume thing that at some point, if you pick up, 2 of those 4, gives you 4 true road wins on the season, and maybe it matters a little bit less who you've actually beaten there. They've certainly shown they can beat anybody who goes to College Park, and they got Purdue coming up in a week and a half or so as they go there. So I tend to side a little bit with Lukas. I have them on the 8 line. I think toward the front of my 8 line. So pretty similar to where he is. They've just kind of done what you'd expect them to do in large part, and maybe they surprise you and get a couple of these other road wins. And then West Virginia metrics look really good. They haven't lost a game outside of quad 1. So even though they've got a lot of losses there, they're all quote unquote good losses. I think the thing that you worry about a little bit with them, just because of the number of losses, is it gets hard to can you get to 500 against the top 3 quadrants, which they're within a game of at this point, but they got 6 wins in Q4 that probably aren't going anywhere as you look at that. But I think you've seen enough from West Virginia. Winning at Pittsburgh looks better than people probably thought it would. I think they ran them off the floor, if I'm remembering that game correctly.
Yep.
And so beating Florida again for bubble purposes can be helpful. And so I think if they can find ways to, they're a little bit the same. Can you find another couple good road wins there? But they've got tons of chances, as we talked about on Friday with a lot of the Big 12 teams. It's just, can you avoid losing the vast majority of them and playing yourself off of the bubble in a way that, because you just ticked so many losses as you go forward from them.
Yeah, I've got both as single-digit seeds right now.
Single digit. Wow. Okay. Yeah. And I guess that is a team where once they're in, then you can lean more on the quality metrics for seeding if you want to do that. And that certainly bumps West Virginia up among other teams.
Yeah. Your challenge as you look in the next few games for West Virginia is they've got Iowa State at home, then they go 2 Texas and 2 Baylor. Like if you lose all 3 of those games, it really becomes difficult to justify. You're then 14-12.
Yep.
And historical precedent is saying, well, you're 2 games over 500. That's not going to happen. So that's the downside of what they have, is a lot of good opportunities. But if you get a stretch of really tough games and you lose them all, the quality metrics can only save you so much from actually, losing games.
Yep. All right. One last team I want to discuss before, we go to chat questions. and that's Charleston, another team that is kind of Clemson adjacent, where, all right, are they going to be in the at-large pool? Are they going to end up as an auto bid out of the Colonial? But Andy, I'll go to you first here. Do they have a chance at at-large still after the 2 straight losses that they've suffered in the CAA?
I think it's a pretty uphill climb right now. They only have 3 losses. I really feel like they have to win out and then maybe lose in the finals of the CAA tournament. Maybe that's to the extreme, but they don't really have, any loss they take from here on out is going to be a bad loss. And so that becomes challenging. Their quality metrics are average almost 80, which is not great. They don't have a quad 1 win. They can't get one based on who they've got left. They are 3-0 in quad 2 by beating Virginia Tech and Kent State each by a basket. I think even the UNCW win was also by 2 points. So your 3 best wins came by a total of 6 points, which there's something to be said for winning close games. But when you look and the other metrics don't necessarily back that up, it becomes pretty difficult to, have 2 Q3 losses. Non-conference strength of schedule is almost 300th. There's just not a lot of things working in their favor at this point. So they really just have to keep winning and stacking those wins and making it pretty far in the CAA tournament, because I think another bad loss would, kind of spell their doom. I mean, I have Hofstra as the auto bid there because they beat them head to head and didn't have Charleston in what I would consider to be the first 4 out. So I guess that gives you at least a little bit of thought into where I have them.
Yeah, even Virginia Tech swooning without Hunter Couture hurts Charleston. Like, just based on that was supposed to be their headline win in that tournament, and that one has not aged as well as maybe they had hoped. Lukas, do you kind of feel the same way? Just they're going to need to do it on quantity of wins, basically, right?
Yeah, I think they have to make the CAA final, and that's while winning out the regular season. I don't really see much of another path to getting there, and I think that stems from Andy already mentioned it. He doesn't have them in his first 4 out. I wouldn't either, and they don't really have the opportunities to make a move into that. Like, if you look at the CAA as a whole, there's really only 2 wins of significant value to a team that's on the outside looking in right now. That'd be beating Towson or UNCW on the road, which they've already done. And we still have them on the outside looking in. Their road games left are against Hampton and Elon, which don't really move the needle at all. So I think they're in a spot where they need to win out the regular season and make the CAA final and lose to, one of the Hofstra, Towson, UNCW at best.
I want to ask, like, would it almost be kind of a death knell for them if it was Hofstra and then they had gone 0-2 against Hofstra and hadn't beat them? Like, was it almost be more helpful if it was UNC Wilmington and not somebody that then swept them from their league?
I feel the opposite personally. I'd rather lose to Hofstra twice, I think, and just be like, oh, this is a bad matchup. We lost 2 of our 4 games all season to the same team. We beat everybody else.
Okay, I buy that.
That's at least how I think of it. I don't know if the committee would agree with me on that, but that's how my thought process would go. Would just be chalk it up to bad matchup.
That makes sense. All right, let's turn to the chat. There's plenty of wonderful activity going on in there. A lot of Big East chatter. Big East fans, passionate. Love to see it. Speaking of the Big East, our producer Dagan is a Seton Hall grad. Dagan, what do you got for us? Any questions that we should be discussing?
Yeah, you took my comments right out of my mouth. A lot of Big East chatter in the chat. Where do you see? Jacob wants to know: can UConn jump to a 3 or 4 seed with wins over Creighton and Marquette?
Can they beat Creighton and Marquette? That's my first question.
Yeah, I think so. It obviously also depends. This is what gets difficult. I think everybody, they're good questions to ask, but the challenge becomes like it doesn't only matter what you do. So I know Lukas probably gets this a lot too, where people ask questions on Twitter like, well, what if this happens? Where can they go? Well, if you were the only one playing games, then maybe that would be a little bit easier to answer. But I do think so. I mean, their wins from the beginning of the season still carry a lot of weight. Those aren't discounted, and so they've already stacked some good things on their resume. So being able to pick off a couple of the other good teams would certainly help them. Feels to me like a 3 is probably the ceiling at this point for them. Just there's all those Big 12 teams you got to kind of jump who every game is a chance to pad your resume a little bit. I think they would need a lot of things to happen around them to get up to that point. But I think 3's the ceiling, but I think they'd almost have to maybe not win out in the regular season to get there, but I think they'd have to come pretty close to that.
Yeah, I agree with Andy across the board on that. Although I will say that I think this hypothetical actually gives a little bit more information than normal. and that a win over Marquette would also mean a loss for Marquette in there. And with Marquette and UConn both kind of sitting around the 4-5 seed range right now, I think that would get UConn up to the 4 line if they take Marquette and Creighton this week.
Oh, one thing we maybe could have discussed earlier, but I just want to do a little like, how much does a team's net matter on their profile? Is it like 5% of what you care about? Like, it's really not that important, right?
I don't give much credence to it unless it's a clear outlier.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say the same. It's, unless there's something that
like
looks
Wisconsin being at 77 matters to me a bit. I think it'd be weird to I think it's weird to include a team as an at-large team if they're a road win over them isn't even quadrant 1. But overall, I don't put too much credence to it.
Yeah,
Yep,
it's just a sorting tool. That's the thing. That's what it matters most as. So people stressing about their own team's net, don't worry about it. It's not that important. All right, what else, Dagan?
I want to flip it now. If Marquette beats UConn and Creighton this week, can they get to the 2 seed line?
I think it's a 3 for me. I think that's a 3. I think the 2 seed line is pretty solid right now. I think we kind of talked about that a bit with the 1 seeds even, and that we've talked about how many of those 2 seeds are in contention for ones, whether that's Texas, Kansas, Arizona. We didn't mention them, but I even throw UCLA as a dark horse to get on the 1 line of that group, which really only leaves 1 of those 2 seeds up for grabs, and that's Tennessee for me right now. I think it would be hard for Marquette to get all the way up to there, but I think they'd be on the 3 line pretty safely with those wins.
Yeah, I'd agree, because you've got, at least for mine, 3 Big 12 teams on the 3 line.
Yep.
If they continue to kind of beat each other up, that opens the door. Plus, you've picked up those wins if you're Marquette in that scenario. So yeah, 3 feels likely if you're able to pull that off. I think 2 is a little bit difficult. Lukas mentioned UCLA. They're kind of an interesting case. I think everybody thinks that they're good, but their profile is not overly exciting as you really look at it in terms of who they've beaten. So could potentially they get surpassed by somebody if they get really hot and they drop a couple games with that seems they do go to Oregon over the weekend, but and they have 4 road games left, but until that last weekend when they host Arizona, that's really their next big chance for a win. So they don't have a bad loss by any stretch of the imagination. Just again, you kind of look at them, you're counting a lot of the metrics and all the things that we think about how good they really are versus what maybe their accomplishments have been to this point. But even so, if they continue to play well, I'm not sure Marquette passes them even with some of those wins.
Yeah, tricky thing with UCLA. They have the same number of Q1A and Q1 wins as Wisconsin. Actually, less Q1 wins than Wisconsin. Like that's how skewed it's been. That's kind of the good fortune of playing in the Big Ten versus every game in the Pac-12 is Q2. It's not Q1. That's tricky. What else, Dagan?
What are you guys' thoughts on Iowa? What's their ceiling and what's their floor for a seed?
I love Iowa's resume right now. I'm going to be honest. 7 quad 1 wins, 10-6 over the first 2 quadrants. I've really jumped on the Iowa bandwagon from a bracketology perspective of late. Top 33 across all metrics. I moved the Hawkeyes to a 6 seed this morning. I feel pretty good about where Iowa stands right now. I think that they are in the mix to be like a very dark horse for a protected seed just because of how many opportunities the Big Ten gives. I think they have arguably the worst loss in the entire country. But one that I believe they played without Chris Murray and without Connor McCafferty. So that's a game that if they're really in the mix for things and they play well down the stretch, I think that's one that could be a little bit more discounted.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. They're moving up for me. I think that Eastern Illinois loss still hangs in the back of your mind as you're trying to figure out what to do with them. But as you said, there were some personnel things. Now we can argue whether that justifies losing to Eastern Illinois at that point. But I do think that'll. Yeah, it'll certainly be a discussion point. I think for them, if you want to, looking at positive things, as you said, 7 quad 1 wins, they're 10-6 in quads 1 and 2. But then oddly, they're 5-2 in quads 3 and 4. So go figure. And they've got, 2 true road wins at this point. So I think that's an area where if they shore that up a little bit, things can be helpful. A very tall order to do that going to Purdue this week, but they do still go
4 out of the next 5 on the road. This is the move. This is Saturday at Augusta for Iowa.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at those next 4, they go to Purdue, to Minnesota, host Ohio State, go to Northwestern, to Wisconsin. So outside of the Purdue game, not against like the top teams in the conference, although there's really only one top team in the Big Ten, and then everybody else is like within a game of 500. But some good opportunities for them. They still go to IU later in the season as well. So I like them. I've got them as a 7. but pretty close to the 6 and what I'm looking at now. So I think maybe they get up to a 5 if you continue to go there, because I think the question was what their ceiling is. I think floor wise, I mean, if the bottom falls out, maybe they dip to a 9 or something. They don't win a lot of these road games. I think you could see them, slip a couple spots, but I think they'd have to lose so many games given what they've already accomplished with 7 quad 1 wins already. That's going to, be kind of a life preserver for them unless disaster strikes.
Agreed. Anything else, Dagan?
Yeah, we have a few more.
Fantastic.
St. Mary's, can they get a higher seed than Gonzaga? And I'm the only one that looks at everybody's bracket here, and I know a few people already have them above Gonzaga.
I like this question. So, and Andy, what do you think here?
I was one of the ones that had them above Gonzaga. I mean, at some point, the metrics have to matter. And I said this one of the first shows I came on this year. It's like if they're this high in the net, I think you really struggle for the selection committee to put them super low. So I know we just said we don't really look at the net, but I also feel like if you put them at, I had them as a 4 this time, so they're not like way up there. But even earlier in the season, they're up that high, and it feels like they may be like a 7 seed, but you're ranked in the top 10 of the tool that you believe is what you want to use to sort wins. I don't know that you can totally fly in the face of that as you go forward and look at it there. So I have them as a 4 right in front of Gonzaga. The San Diego State win is great. Beating Gonzaga is great. I do agree there's not a ton of quality there, but I also think if you look at Gonzaga's resume, there's some questions as well. So I have them there right now. The metrics on the quality side are all pretty good. And even in resume metrics, they're pretty close to Gonzaga. The strength of record is kind of an outlier for them at 27. But if you look at the other two, they rank ahead of Gonzaga and KPI as well. So I think they're pretty tight. But for me, they beat them, and I think there's definitely some things that favor them if you want to look at it that way.
And they get to play them again, right, Lucas? Like they've got the chances to kind of stamp that like official we're higher than Gonzaga.
Yeah, I mean, I am a little bit on the opposite of Andy. I have them right next to each other on the 4 line, but I have Gonzaga 1 spot ahead still. For me, I think the win St. Mary's has drew them closer. But for me, Gonzaga has 4 wins over the field. St. Mary's has 2. And quite frankly, I think beating Xavier on a neutral site is probably better than beating Gonzaga at home.
All right. What's next?
Alabama, for that matter. Sorry.
Yeah.
What's next, Dagan?
We'll do 2 more here. What do you guys make of Creighton's resume? Obviously, started the year off a little bit rough, but obviously missing some key pieces. So, what do you guys make of their resume as they come down the stretch here?
I'll go to Lucas first. I think Andy probably discussed Creighton some on Friday's show, so I'll get Lucas's take first.
Yeah, I think Creighton off sheer resume and metrics right now probably belongs in the 7-8 seed range. I have them sitting on the 7 line. I think we could see them get higher because of the Kalkbrenner factor. Having on the floor, obviously they're way better. But overall resume wise, 6 and 7 against squads 1 and 2. They have a quad 3 loss in there. They're kind of in the same boat as like a Duke, around that same area in terms of just having a pretty solid middle of the pack resume. If you want to compare them to a team like Maryland that we already discussed, who's also 6 and 7 across the upper 2 quadrants without a quad 1A win, you can. I think that those are teams that are kind of all in the same mix. I think they're a team that's likely to be overseeded compared to their resume in terms of putting them more towards a 5 or a 6 than a 7 or an 8 because of how they played with Ryan Kalkbrenner versus without. But I think there's still room to decide if they're really close to those 5 or 6s right now, which I don't think they really are.
Yeah, I think they kind of end up, at least for now, right around where Lucas said. I think if you're the committee, I'm not sure you feel
they're going to be a dangerous team there.
Slotting them in as an 8 or a 9, and they're waiting a 1 seed in the second round. I do think there's some validity to that part of it. And yeah, they've played well. Even the losses they've taken in conference play as they've gone. So they're 9-2 in their last 11. They lost to UConn in Xavier on the road. One of those just by 3 points. So I think they're acquitting themselves relatively well and have chances certainly down the stretch to they host UConn, they host Marquette. So I think those become really important games for them to try to get those top end wins. A lot of winnable road games as well to show that you can do that. So I think they've got a chance to really beef that up. And again, another team looking to try to justify some of the quality metrics and things like that by winning some games and improving their resume.
Another thing I'll say about Creighton is I think we preach a lot that conference record doesn't matter. I think most of that preaching comes more towards the bubble. I think there's value in winning a conference, and I think Creighton has a pretty decent shot to still win the Big East.
Very true.
All right, last one. We're going to look at a team that a few of you guys had in their last four in, just a week ago, and they're going the wrong way. It's Arizona State. They have any chance of getting back to the NCAA tournament, or should Sun Devils fans get ready for the NIT?
They want Creighton to keep winning. That's for sure.
They have not done themselves any favors whatsoever at this point. And so the challenge, as we talked about before with the Pac-12, is that the number of wins you can get there that really move the needle is not what it is in some other conferences. And so they are in a difficult spot where you don't impress anybody by beating Stanford and Cal up next. You don't really impress anybody by beating Colorado and Utah at home. And they finish with their last three games at Arizona, at UCLA, at USC. You go and win, even two of those games, you win the four leading into that, and you go 2-1 in that stretch. I think you've got an argument at that point. But
I refuse to count out Arizona State until 1:30 a.m. on March 5th.
Yeah,
after that USC game.
Exactly. So that's really the stretch that matters for them. They just got to get there, go 4-0 in the next games, and get to that stretch. At that point they'd have 20 wins, which would be helpful. But yeah, no wins matter except whatever they do in those three.
Get to the road trip at 20-8 and let's dance.
Yeah, give yourself a chance. That's all that matters. All right. I believe that wraps it up. Dagan, anything else we should hit?
We can do a quick one, very quick one. Okay. What seed do you guys have Pitt currently? A team we haven't talked about too much yet, and that's been going in the right direction.
Pittsburgh.
I've got Pitt hinging on my 10-11 line right now. I haven't really decided. I think I put them at the 11 this morning, but they could easily be a 10 for me tomorrow. Quad 4 loss kind of holds them down. Quality rankings are nearly at 60 on their average, but 8 and 6 across the upper two quadrants, I think, puts them pretty safely in the field. And I think you can make an argument as high as a 9 if you want to.
Yeah, I had them as, I think, my third or fourth 10 seed at this point. So kind of in the
They're my top
general
11
vicinity. I think you can. The teams I have pretty close to them around there, West Virginia and Northwestern. They lost to one, they beat one. As you look at head to head and kind of some of those teams that are closely clustered together. But yeah, I have them right in that 10-11 range. I think there's things you can like that would slide them up toward the top of the 10 line. There's things you can not like that might push them back onto the 11. But to me, they've won enough and won enough on the road to be kind of clear of the last four in category.
Agreed.
Well, that is it. Do we have any games to watch this week, fellas? Ones that you are most looking at?
1,000 of them. Good God.
1,000. 1,000. Let's list all 1,000.
Let me pull up my email to Dagan with my full list. Let's see. I'm entering.
Texas, Kansas tonight is the
Texas,
big one
Kansas,
Duke,
Miami.
Sure.
Texas, Kansas, Duke, Miami, Marquette, UConn, TCU, K-State, Rutgers, Indiana, Arkansas, Kentucky, Auburn, TAMU, North Carolina, Wake, Maryland, Michigan State, Nevada, New Mexico, NC State, Virginia, San Diego State, Utah State, Iowa State, West Virginia, Creighton, Seton Hall, Oklahoma, Baylor, Wisconsin, Penn State, Florida, Bama, USC, Oregon, Northwestern, Ohio State, Iowa, Purdue, and that's all before Friday.
So people should watch basketball this week, is what we're saying. Andy, any that you're like zeroed in on, non-IU fandom based?
I did have most of those. At least if I was able to keep up with Lukas, he really took your challenge to heart to list as many as he could. So that was good. I think as you look at ones around the bubble, Auburn going to Texas A&M is another good chance at a win for the Aggies. It's a lot of things that we talked about this week. Maryland goes on the road to Michigan State. Can they find a way to win that game? Carolina goes to Wake. Can they find a way there? And some good Mountain West games: Nevada, New Mexico, and San Diego State, Utah State. Those matter for, really. I think Nevada, New Mexico, who's a tough team for me to totally sort out. And Utah State, those are important games for all three of those. So I think those become pretty important as you look at it that way. And so those are the big ones. Wisconsin, Penn State, big one for the bubble as well, as you think of it, as you think of those teams who are either in that first four out or lurking just outside that first four out.
Yeah, that's not quite loser leaves town, but we're getting right down to it with those
pretty
teams
darn
that are outside
close.
the field. Yep. All right, that is it for this Monday edition of Fielding the 68. We'll be back on Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Different crew, but same kind of idea here. Going to get a lot of bracketology knowledge. Don't you worry about that. Thank you to Dagan behind the scenes. He will be releasing the consensus field on Twitter, so keep an eye out for that. Coming from the Field of 68 on Twitter. Shout out to Bet Rivers for powering this episode. As always, thank you to Andy Bottoms and Lukas Harkins for educating all of us, both the chat and myself. It is always nice to hear from the experts. That's it for tonight. Enjoy that Kansas-Texas game tonight, folks, and we will see you